Have you ever noticed how some people seem to crumble under pressure while others remain unshakable? It's as if they're built differently, standing firm when everything around them is falling apart. What's their secret? It's not superhuman strength or some hidden advantage. It's something far more profound and accessible. The answer lies in Stoicism, an ancient philosophy that teaches us how to navigate life's storms with unwavering resilience. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's greatest Stoic thinkers, once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That simple idea, focusing on what we can control and letting go of what we can't, is the foundation of why some people never collapse under pressure. Think about the last time you faced a high-stakes situation. Maybe it was a job interview, a tough conversation, or a moment where everything seemed to hinge on your next move. Did you feel your heart race, your palms sweat, or your mind spiral into doubt? Now imagine facing that same pressure with calm clarity, as if you were anchored in an unshakable peace. That's the power of Stoicism. It's not about suppressing emotions or pretending hardship doesn't exist. It's about training your mind to see challenges differently. The Stoics believed that pressure doesn't break us, it reveals us. So what separates those who crumble from those who stand firm? It all comes down to perception, control, and the deliberate practice of resilience. This isn't just philosophy, it's a practical toolkit for life. Whether you're an athlete facing a championship game, a leader making tough decisions, or someone just trying to get through a difficult day, Stoicism offers timeless principles to help you stay grounded. Over the next few minutes, we'll explore how you can apply these ideas to your own life. You'll discover how to reframe pressure, strengthen your mental resilience, and cultivate the kind of unshakable calm that keeps you steady no matter what comes your way. This isn't about becoming invincible, it's about becoming adaptable, focused, and ultimately free from the weight of unnecessary stress. So let's dive in and uncover the Stoic secrets to thriving under pressure. One of the biggest traps we fall into when facing pressure is the illusion that we control far more than we actually do. We convince ourselves that if we just worry enough, plan enough, or react strongly enough, we can bend external events to our will. But here's the uncomfortable truth Stoicism forces us to confront. Most of what stresses us isn't ours to control in the first place. Epictetus, the former slave-turned-Stoic teacher, put it bluntly, some things are within our power while others are not. That simple distinction changes everything. Our opinions, our efforts, our desires, these belong to us. But outcomes, other people's actions, even the weather, those are outside our hands. The moment we confuse the two, we hand over our peace of mind. Picture this. You've spent weeks preparing a crucial presentation at work. The day arrives and technical failures delay your start. A key colleague interrupts with unscheduled questions. The audience seems distracted. Your heart sinks as you think, this is ruined. But here's where Stoicism flips the script. The tech issues, not yours to fix in that moment. The colleague's timing, not your choice. The audience's focus, not your responsibility. What is yours? Your preparation, your adaptability, your decision to respond with professionalism rather than panic. That shift in focus, from what's happening to you to what's happening within you, is where resilience is born. This isn't passivity, it's strategic clarity. Think of a sailor in a storm. They can't control the wind or waves, but they can adjust the sails, steady the rudder, and make calculated decisions. That's the Stoic approach to pressure. When we stop exhausting ourselves trying to command the uncontrollable, we free up immense energy to master what we can: our judgments, our actions, our character. So take a recent stressor you faced. Maybe it was traffic making you late, a last-minute change to plans, or someone speaking unfairly about you. Now ask, where did you spend more mental energy? On what was truly yours to influence, or on what wasn't? That awareness alone begins rewiring how you experience pressure. Seneca once observed that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, a truth anyone who's lain awake at night replaying worst-case scenarios understands all too well. The Stoics recognized that our minds have a peculiar talent for turning small obstacles into towering catastrophes, long before reality ever has a chance to unfold. This isn't just philosophical musing, it's a psychological reality. When faced with uncertainty, our brains default to filling the gaps with fear, convincing us that failure will be humiliating, that rejection will be unbearable, that one misstep will unravel everything. But here's the radical Stoic countermove. What if the story you're telling yourself about the challenge is far worse than the challenge itself? Take the Roman general Scipio Africanus, who faced Hannibal's army, a force that had already crushed Rome's troops in devastating battles. While others saw inevitable defeat, Scipio saw something else entirely. An opponent whose tactics could be studied, whose strengths had blind spots, whose reputation was as much psychological weapon as reality. By refusing to let collective panic dictate his judgment, he didn't just win the war, he rewrote what seemed possible. That's the power of perception. The Stoics called this prohersis, our capacity to choose how we interpret events. A delayed flight isn't inherently disastrous. It's an opportunity to read or reflect. A critical comment isn't proof of inadequacy. It's data to consider or discard. The event itself is neutral until our judgment labels it. This isn't about positive thinking. It's about accurate thinking. Imagine holding two versions of the same stressful situation in your hands, one distorted by dread, the other examined with calm objectivity. The Stoic practice pause and ask, what am I assuming here? Is this genuinely catastrophic, or have I added layers of meaning that don't exist? When the ancient Stoics visualized worst-case scenarios, a technique called Premeditatio malorum, they weren't indulging fear. They were stripping it of its power by realizing, if this happens, I can endure it. If that happens, I'll adapt. The dread shrinks when you confront it plainly. So try this with a current worry. Maybe it's an upcoming performance review, a health concern, or a relationship tension. Write down the bare facts, then separate them from the mental commentary you've attached. How much of your stress comes from the actual circumstance, and how much from the narrative you've constructed around it? That space between event and interpretation, that's where your freedom lies. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself in his private writings, choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been. The pressure doesn't disappear, but its grip on you loosens the moment you see it for what it is and what it isn't. There's a profound shift that happens when we stop fighting reality and start embracing it, when we move from resisting what life throws at us to accepting it, even loving it. The Stoics called this amor fati, the love of fate, a concept later echoed by Friedrich Nietzsche when he wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity." At its core, it's the radical idea that every obstacle, every setback, every moment of pressure isn't something to resent but an essential part of the journey. Epictetus put it simply, don't seek for everything to happen as you wish, but wish for everything to happen as it actually does, then your life will flow well. Consider the story of Olympic sprinter Derek Redmond. During the 1992 Barcelona Games, he tore his hamstring midway through the race. Most would have crumpled in defeat, but Redmond refused to let go of his moment. He stood up, limping toward the finish line as the crowd roared. Then his father broke through security to support him, and together they crossed it. That image became iconic not because of the gold medal he didn't win, but because of the grit and grace he showed in embracing the pain. What seemed like an ending became a defining chapter of his legacy. That's amor fati in action, the refusal to see setbacks as failures and instead as raw material for resilience. This mindset transforms pressure from a threat into fuel. When we stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What can this make of me?" everything changes. A missed promotion becomes space to refine your skills. A rejection becomes clarity about what truly matters. Even loss can carve deeper capacity for compassion. The Stoics didn't just tolerate adversity, they saw it as the forge where character is shaped. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." So think of one challenge you've been resisting, a difficult colleague, a financial strain, a personal limitation. What if, just for a moment, you stopped seeing it as an enemy and started seeing it as a teacher, not with resignation, but with curiosity? What strength could this reveal in me? What path might this open that I wouldn't have seen otherwise? That shift doesn't erase the struggle, but it changes your relationship to it. Pressure stops being something that happens to you and starts being something that works through you. And in that space, you find not just endurance, but a deeper kind of freedom. What if your worst fears came true, not as a hypothetical disaster, but as an actual event you were prepared to face? The Stoics had a surprising answer. They'd practice it in advance. This counterintuitive exercise, called Premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, wasn't about pessimism. It was about immunity. By mentally rehearsing adversity, they stripped fear of its power and discovered something extraordinary. The worst-case scenario, when examined calmly, was often endurable. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, put it bluntly: he robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand. Imagine standing on the edge of a high dive. The first time, your legs shake, but after a dozen jumps, the height loses its terror. That's the essence of negative visualization. The Stoics didn't wait for life to push them off the ledge. They climbed up voluntarily in their minds, not to suffer, but to desensitize themselves to the fall. When Seneca wrote about losing his wealth, his health, even his friends, he wasn't wallowing in gloom. He was testing his own resilience, asking, if this happened, how would I respond? And in that space between the imagined loss and his reaction, he found freedom. Here's how you can apply this today. Pick one ordinary inconvenience: your phone breaking, missing a train, a last-minute cancellation. Now, instead of reflexively reacting, pause. Picture it happening tomorrow and mentally walk through your response. Not the frantic version of you, but the calm, resourceful one. What's your first move, your backup plan, the Stoic twist? You'll likely realize two things. The problem is smaller than your fear of it, and you're more capable than you think. This practice isn't about inviting misery, it's about vaccinating yourself against panic. Consider the CEO who envisions their product failing before launch. Or the parent who mentally rehearses handling a toddler's public meltdown. They're not manifesting disaster, they're building mental reflexes. The soldier who trains for ambushes sleeps soundly the night before battle because they've already lived it 100 times in their mind. That's the Stoic edge. When you've stared down the worst and survived it in advance, pressure becomes a familiar opponent, not an unexpected enemy. Try this for a week. Each morning, spend 2 minutes visualizing one realistic challenge: a work conflict, a financial hiccup, a personal rejection. Then script your Stoic response. If this happens, I'll focus on what I control. If that happens, I'll adapt. You'll notice something shift. the dread that once clung to these scenarios starts to loosen, because when you've already crossed that bridge in your mind, reality feels less like a cliff and more like ground you've already walked. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in his private journal, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." That simple command cuts to the heart of Stoic action, not grand philosophies debated in quiet rooms, but choices made in the messy reality of daily life. The Roman emperor understood something profound. Pressure doesn't dissolve purpose, it reveals it. While others around him might have been consumed by the chaos of war, political intrigue, or personal loss, his focus never wavered from what he could do rather than what he couldn't control. This is the discipline of action, the deliberate practice of aligning effort with intention, regardless of external storms. Picture a surgeon in the operating room. The monitors beep urgently, an unexpected complication arises, seconds tick away, yet their hands remain steady. What keeps them from spiraling into panic? It's not indifference, it's clarity. They've trained for this moment, not just in technique but in mindset. Every movement is purposeful, every decision anchored to a single goal, saving a life. The noise of the emergency fades into the background because their intent acts as a shield. That's the Stoic approach to pressure in action. The chaos around us doesn't disappear, but when we fix our attention on the next right step, not the what-ifs, we regain our footing. This contrasts sharply with how most of us react under stress. Think of a time you faced an overwhelming deadline or conflict. Did your mind leap ahead to catastrophes, or did it zero in on solutions? Reactive panic scatters our energy, like trying to bail out a boat with a sieve. Stoic action, though, is the equivalent of calmly plugging one leak at a time. Marcus Aurelius modeled this during his military campaigns. While lesser leaders might have been paralyzed by the unpredictability of battle, he focused on what was squarely in his sphere: troop morale, supply lines, strategic adjustments. The outcome wasn't guaranteed, but his commitment to doing his part never faltered. So how do we cultivate this kind of focus? Start small. Identify one meaningful task you've been putting off, not because it's easy, but because it matters. Maybe it's finally having that difficult conversation, starting a creative project you've delayed, or simply committing to a daily walk for your mental health. Then protect that intention like the surgeon guards their focus in the operating room. When distractions arise, and they will, ask yourself, does this serve my purpose or dilute it? The more you practice this discernment, the more pressure becomes a backdrop rather than the main event. Here's the paradox: the discipline of action isn't about doing more. It's about doing what aligns with your deepest priorities and letting go of the rest. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it," he wasn't advocating for perfection. He was outlining a filter for intentional living. External noise, criticism, competition, even praise loses its power to derail you when your actions stem from inner conviction. So today, choose one goal, however modest, and pursue it with the quiet determination of someone who knows why it matters. The pressure around you might not change, but your relationship to it will. Stoics don't wait for life to test them, they test themselves first. This might sound counterintuitive in a world obsessed with comfort, but here's the truth: resilience isn't built in the absence of pressure, it's forged through deliberate exposure to it. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who trained Epictetus, put it plainly: how can a person become courageous if they only seek comfort? How can they learn self-control if they've never denied themselves anything? The answer lies in voluntary discomfort, the conscious choice to embrace small hardships as training for life's inevitable challenges. Think of it like a muscle. You wouldn't expect to lift heavy weights without first strengthening your body through gradual effort. The mind works the same way. When you intentionally face discomfort, whether it's waking up early, skipping a meal, or taking a cold shower, you're not punishing yourself. You're rehearsing for moments when life forces those choices upon you. The cold shower is more than a shock to the system. It's a masterclass in standing firm when discomfort arrives uninvited. The hunger pangs from skipping a snack, they teach you that you can endure more than you think. THESE, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter become mental armor. History is full of leaders who understood this principle. Theodore Roosevelt, an admirer of Stoicism, deliberately exposed himself to physical hardships, freezing river swims, grueling hikes, to prepare for the unpredictability of politics and war. He didn't do it because he enjoyed suffering. He did it because he knew comfort breeds fragility. The same principle applies to modern life. When you've already faced the sting of a cold shower, a difficult conversation feels less daunting. When you've practiced patience in traffic, a work setback doesn't derail you. Voluntary discomfort shrinks the gap between what you fear and what you can handle. Here's the challenge: pick one small hardship to invite into your daily routine. It could be as simple as leaving your phone outside the bedroom at night, taking the stairs instead of the elevator, or writing a thank you note by hand instead of sending a quick text. The goal isn't to make life harder, it's to prove to yourself that you can thrive even when things aren't easy. START, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. The first time you opt for a cold blast at the end of your shower, your instinct will scream to turn the knob back. But when you stay under that water for just 10 more seconds, something shifts. You realize discomfort isn't an enemy, it's a teacher. And with each small victory, you rewrite the story of what you're capable of bearing. This practice isn't about toughness for its own sake. It's about freedom, the kind that comes when you stop running from minor inconveniences and start seeing them as opportunities to grow. The Stoics didn't seek discomfort because they were masochists. They sought it because they knew something profound. The person who can choose hardship willingly will never be at its mercy when it arrives unasked. So ask yourself today, what's one small discomfort you can invite in, not to suffer but to strengthen? That choice, repeated daily, is how ordinary people build extraordinary resilience. Imagine zooming out not just from your current problem, but from your entire life, your city, even the planet itself. That's the power of what Marcus Aurelius called the view from above, a mental exercise that shifts your perspective from the clutter of daily stress to the vastness of cosmic time and space. He'd remind himself in his private writings, think of the substance of the whole universe, of how small your share of it. Think of the span of time, of how brief and fleeting your portion. It sounds almost unsettling at first, but here's the paradox. When you confront how small your struggles are in the grand scheme, they don't shrink you, they free you. Picture Earth from space for a moment. All those borders we argue over, the traffic jams that infuriate us, the gossip that consumes our attention from that distance, they vanish. The Stoics weren't suggesting we ignore real problems. They were teaching us to distinguish between what's urgent and what's truly important. A missed deadline feels catastrophic in the moment, but will it ripple into next year? That awkward conversation you're replaying in your head, will it even cross your mind a decade from now? This isn't about dismissing your feelings, it's about granting yourself the clarity to invest your energy where it counts. History offers a striking example. When Thomas Cromwell faced execution under Henry VIII's volatile reign, his final words were reported to be, "I die in the Catholic faith, not doubting in any article of my faith." In his last moments, he didn't plead or rage against the injustice. He anchored himself in what mattered most, his beliefs. That's the view from above in action. When you measure your current crisis against the scale of your entire life, or better yet, against the sweep of human history, something shifts. The petty grievances lose their grip. The real priorities come into focus. Try this the next time stress starts to spiral. Pause and ask, if I looked back at this moment from my deathbed, what would I wish I'd paid attention to? The answer might surprise you. The email that felt like an emergency becomes background noise. The criticism that stung fades beside the relationships you nurtured. This exercise isn't meant to trivialize your experience. It's designed to amplify what truly deserves your limited time and attention. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, keep before your eyes the swiftness with which all that exists is swept past us and carried away. Pressure doesn't disappear when you adopt this perspective, but it settles into its proper place, no longer a mountain, just one pebble on a long path. Here's the invitation. Step outside tonight and look up at the stars, not as a poetic gesture, but as a deliberate practice. Let the sheer scale of it all remind you that most of what weighs you down today is temporary. The deadlines, the conflicts, the imperfections, they're part of your story, but they aren't the whole of it. What remains when you strip those away, that's where your real strength lies. Epictetus once offered a piece of advice that cuts through centuries of noise. Don't let the future disturb you. You will meet it with the same weapons of reason and mind that today guard you against the present. That simple directive, to anchor yourself in the here and now, isn't just philosophy. It's a survival tool for modern life. Consider how different this is from the way most of us operate. We juggle emails while eating lunch, scroll through news feeds during conversations, and mentally rehearse tomorrow's problems while today's opportunities slip by unnoticed. The Stoics didn't have smartphones, but they understood something we've forgotten. Distraction isn't just a habit, it's a thief of clarity. Think about the last time you faced real pressure. Maybe your heart raced as you prepared to speak in a meeting, or your mind spun with worst-case scenarios before a difficult conversation. Now ask yourself, how much of that stress came from what was actually happening, and how much came from the mental noise you added? The Stoic practice of mindfulness isn't about emptying your mind. It's about noticing where your attention goes, then gently steering it back to what's in front of you. Imagine a musician tuning their instrument before a performance. They're not ignoring the crowd or their nerves. They're focusing on the precise tension of each string. That single-pointed attention is what Epictetus championed, not as a luxury, but as a discipline. Modern research backs this ancient wisdom. Studies show that multitasking doesn't just reduce productivity, it frays our ability to handle stress. Every time we split our focus, we're training our brains to crave distraction, leaving us more vulnerable to anxiety when pressure mounts. The Stoic alternative. Treat your attention like a spotlight. You can't illuminate everything at once, but you can choose where to aim it with intention. One practical technique, rooted in both Stoicism and modern psychology, is breath awareness. When you notice tension rising, pause and count 5 slow inhales and exhales. This isn't just calming, it's a deliberate reset, echoing Marcus Aurelius' reminder. The present moment is all you ever have. Here's the challenge. Pick one routine task today: drinking your morning coffee, walking to your car, washing dishes, and do it with full attention. Notice the temperature of the cup in your hands, the rhythm of your footsteps, the sensation of water on your skin. When your mind wanders to yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's deadlines, guide it back without judgment. This isn't passive relaxation, it's active training. The more you practice presence in calm moments, the more accessible it becomes when storms hit. So ask yourself, when was the last time you truly paused to observe your thoughts under pressure, not to suppress them or spiral into them, but to witness them with detached curiosity, like clouds passing across the sky? That space between stimulus and response where you choose whether to react or breathe, to panic or proceed, is where Stoic mindfulness lives. It's not about controlling every thought. It's about refusing to let every thought control you. Seneca's letters contain a piece of advice that feels startlingly modern. Choose someone whose way of life and words, even whose face mirroring character within you, approve. Keep them before you at all times, either as guardian or model. He wasn't talking about admiration from afar. He was describing something far more active, the deliberate study of how another human being navigates adversity, so you can internalize their blueprint when your own resilience wavers. The Stoics didn't just theorize about courage. They curated mental libraries of exemplars, real people who'd faced the unimaginable and emerged with their dignity intact. This practice wasn't about idol worship. It was about having a lifeline to reach for when the waters got rough. Consider the story of Gaius Mucius Scaevola, a figure rarely mentioned outside ancient Roman texts but revered by Stoics for centuries. As legend goes, he infiltrated an enemy camp to assassinate a king, failed, and was captured. When threatened with torture, he thrust his right hand into a fire and held it there without flinching, saying, "See how little a body matters to those who seek great glory." The king, stunned, freed him. Now the Stoics weren't recommending self-harm. They were highlighting something subtler. Scaevola's power came not from the act itself, but from his radical clarity about what mattered more than pain. He became a touchstone for generations, asking, "What would I sacrifice for my principles?" This is why role models matter in Stoicism. They're not distant heroes to put on pedestals, they're mirrors showing us versions of ourselves we might not yet believe in. When Marcus Aurelius felt the weight of imperial responsibilities, he didn't just meditate on abstract virtues. He recalled specific moments, like his adoptive father's calm during crises, and asked how would he handle this. That's the difference between inspiration and emulation. One gives you a fleeting feeling, the other gives you a template for action. So who's in your mental gallery of resilience? Not just famous figures, but perhaps a grandparent who endured hardship with quiet grace, a colleague who turns conflict into collaboration, or even a fictional character whose strength resonates with you. The key is specificity. Don't just admire their traits, study their methods. How did they breathe when stressed? What words did they repeat to themselves? How did they reframe setbacks? Here's your challenge. Pick one person, living or historical, whose composure under pressure you want to channel. Then go deeper than vague admiration. Watch interviews of them speaking under stress. Read their letters or biographies for moments when they stumbled and recovered. The goal isn't to copy them, but to borrow their lens until your own vision clears. As Seneca wrote, we need to set our affections on some good person and keep them constantly before our eyes, so that we may live as if they were watching us. That's the secret. You're not just following an example, you're letting their presence elevate your own. Marcus Aurelius never intended his private writings to become a global phenomenon. Those pages, later titled Meditations, were simply his nightly ritual, a way to untangle the pressures of ruling an empire before sleep. What made them extraordinary wasn't their eloquence, but their raw honesty. Here was the most powerful man in Rome, wrestling with doubt, anger, and fear on parchment, then emerging each morning with renewed clarity. This is the hidden power of Stoic journaling. It doesn't just record thoughts, it refines them. When pressure feels like a storm inside your head, putting words to paper acts as an anchor, turning chaos into something you can hold at arm's length and examine. Think of your mind as a snow globe. When shaken by stress, everything becomes a blur. Writing is the act of setting that globe down and watching the flakes settle until you can see clearly again. Marcus didn't journal to vent, he journaled to distill. One famous entry reads, "Ask yourself, What is this thing that's upsetting me? Can I control it? If yes, act. If no, accept. Notice what's happening here. He's not just describing his frustration, he's dissecting it with surgical precision. That shift from emotional reaction to objective observation is where journaling becomes a Stoic superpower. Modern science confirms what the Stoics knew instinctively. Research shows that expressive writing reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, while boosting function in the prefrontal cortex, where rational decision-making lives. In other words, when you translate turbulent emotions into concrete sentences, you're not just calming your nerves, you're rewiring your brain to handle pressure more effectively. Consider the CEO who journals through a company crisis, or the athlete who processes a loss by writing about it. They're not dwelling on the problem, they're creating space between themselves and the emotion, just as Marcus did 2,000 years ago. Here's how to make this practice work for you. Tonight, take 5 minutes with a notebook and ask, what's one pressure point I can dissect objectively today? Maybe it's a looming deadline that feels overwhelming or a conflict you've been avoiding. Now channel your inner Marcus Aurelius. First, describe the situation plainly, stripping away dramatic language. Instead of "this project is a disaster," try "3 deliverables remain unfinished with 2 days until review." Next, separate facts from interpretations. "My boss frowned during my presentation" is a fact. "She thinks I'm incompetent" is a story you've added. Finally, apply the Stoic fork. What aspects can you influence and what must you release? The magic happens in the details. When Marcus wrote about his anger toward a senator, he didn't stop at "he irritates me." He probed deeper. Why does this person's behavior hook me? Is my reaction revealing an insecurity? That level of honesty transforms journaling from a diary into a dialogue with your wiser self. You'll often find that the pressure itself hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. As words flow onto the page, what felt like a boulder on your chest becomes a pebble in your palm. Don't aim for poetry or perfection. Some of history's most profound Stoic journals are messy, repetitive, even grammatically flawed. What matters is the process of externalizing your inner noise so you can sift through it with reason. Try this experiment. Journal about the same stressor for 3 consecutive nights. Night 1 might be raw emotion. By night 3, you'll likely notice something surprising. The problem hasn't shrunk, but your ability to face it has grown. That's the Stoic secret. We don't conquer pressure by ignoring it, but by examining it under the cool light of written reflection. The page becomes both mirror and mentor, showing you not just what you feel, but who you're becoming in response. Epictetus cut to the heart of communication with one piercing observation. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. This wasn't just etiquette advice, it was a tactical approach to conserving the most precious resource in high-pressure situations: mental clarity. Consider how often we drain our energy reacting to every provocation, explaining ourselves to every critic, or filling every silence with nervous chatter. Now imagine the alternative, the power of strategic silence. A CEO facing a media firestorm doesn't win by firing off tweets in the heat of emotion. They win by pausing, gathering facts, and responding with precision when the noise dies down. That measured silence isn't weakness. It's the discipline of someone who knows words are tools, not reflexes. History offers a masterclass in this principle. When Starbucks faced racial bias accusations at one of its Philadelphia locations in 2018, the initial public outcry was deafening. Rather than rushing to defend or deflect, then CEO Kevin Johnson did something radical. He listened. He met personally with the affected customers, closed 8,000 stores for racial bias training, and let actions speak louder than press releases. The result, what could have been a brand-crippling scandal, became a case study in responsible leadership. That's the Stoic art of silence in action, not the absence of communication, but the intentional space between stimulus and response where wisdom grows. This practice transforms pressure from a trigger into a teacher. Think of a time someone criticized you unfairly. Your pulse quickened, your jaw clenched, and every fiber of your being wanted to retaliate. Now imagine stepping back just long enough to ask, will responding serve me or just my ego? Silence in that moment isn't surrender, it's the ultimate assertion of control. Naval officer James Stockdale, who survived 7 years as a Vietnam POW, credited his endurance to a similar Stoic principle. Tortured prisoners were often paraded before cameras to condemn their country. Stockdale realized his captors couldn't force him to speak, only to make sounds. His silence became both shield and weapon. So where might this practice reshape your daily life? Maybe it's resisting the urge to correct a colleague's minor error in a group email. Perhaps it's pausing for 3 breaths before answering a provocative question. Even small silences accumulate into remarkable resilience. The musician who waits an extra beat before entering a chorus creates anticipation. The negotiator who comfortably holds silence after an offer often gets better terms. These aren't tricks, they're manifestations of a mind secure enough not to fill every void with noise. Epictetus posed a challenge we'd all do well to remember. If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, don't make excuses but answer, he was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone. That twist of perspective, meeting gossip with humor. Then defensiveness reveals the deeper truth about silence. It's not about having nothing to say. It's about recognizing that not every battle deserves your voice. The next time tension rises, experiment with this Stoic superpower. Let the silence settle like dust after a storm, and watch how many conflicts resolve themselves when deprived of your reaction. After all, you can't lose an argument you refuse to join. Seneca called anger a brief madness, a fire that burns the vessel holding it. But what makes this Stoic warning so powerful isn't just its vivid imagery. It's the radical alternative it suggests. Unlike modern self-help that often treats anger as something to suppress or vent, Stoicism offers something more transformative, the deliberate cultivation of compassion as its antidote. Picture 2 colleagues locked in a heated argument over a missed deadline. One sees incompetence, the other sees a struggling single parent working 2 jobs. The facts are identical, but the lens changes everything. That shift from blame to understanding isn't softness. It's strategic wisdom backed by 2,000 years of philosophy. Consider Seneca's own life. As Nero's advisor, he witnessed daily outbursts of imperial rage that cost lives. Yet in his letters, he describes watching an enslaved child drop a valuable vase not with fury, but with curiosity. What fatigue or fear might explain this? That question didn't excuse the mistake. It prevented the corrosive toll of anger on Seneca himself. Modern neuroscience confirms his insight. When researchers at UCLA studied workplace conflicts, they found teams that practiced perspective-taking, actively considering others' stresses, resolved disputes 30% faster with half the lingering tension. The ancient Stoics would nod knowingly. Anger thrives in the vacuum of understanding. Here's how this plays out in practice. Imagine a hospital where 2 nurses clash over a medication error. The reactive path leads to accusations, write-ups, and simmering resentment. But the Stoic approach starts differently, with what Marcus Aurelius called the empathy of shared humanity. Nurse A pauses to recall that Nurse B's mother is undergoing chemotherapy. Nurse B remembers Nurse A just returned from bereavement leave. Suddenly, the same error becomes a system to improve rather than a person to condemn. This isn't about lowering standards, it's about raising awareness. As Epictetus noted, every person's actions make sense from their perspective. Your first task is to understand that perspective. Try this reframe the next time frustration bubbles up. Before reacting, ask 3 Stoic questions. What unseen pressures might this person be carrying? How would I want to be given the benefit of doubt in their position? What constructive action serves our shared goal? A delayed response from your teenager transforms from defiance to exhaustion after exams. A curt email from your boss shifts from pettiness to stress from upstairs. The event stays the same, your suffering changes. History offers a striking example. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy received 2 letters from Khrushchev, one belligerent, one conciliatory. His team assumed they were from different factions. But advisor Llewellyn Thompson, versed in Russian culture, recognized something deeper. The Soviet leader was likely exhausted and conflicted after days without sleep. That insight led Kennedy to ignore the aggressive letter and craft a response to the weary human behind it, a move historians credit with averting nuclear war. So here's your challenge. Identify one recurring friction point in your life, a difficult relative, a frustrating coworker, even a slow-moving driver testing your patience. Next time it flares, experiment with Seneca's approach. Replace "why are they like this" with "what might it feel like to be them right now?" You'll discover what the Stoics knew. Compassion isn't the opposite of strength. It's the mark of a mind secure enough to see beyond its own irritation. The pressure doesn't disappear, but your relationship to it transforms when you realize most people aren't giving you a hard time, they're having one. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, "Time is a river, and strong feelings are its rapids, but the water that passes never returns." That simple observation holds the key to one of Stoicism's most powerful practices, playing the long game. Think about how differently we approach problems when we view them through the lens of days versus decades. The criticism that stings today will likely be forgotten next year. The setback that feels crushing now might become the foundation of your greatest strength. The Stoics weren't naive optimists. They were strategic realists who understood that most suffering comes from overvaluing immediate comfort at the expense of enduring peace. Consider the discipline of a marathon runner. In mile 3, their legs feel fresh, the pace effortless. By mile 20, every muscle screams to stop. What separates those who collapse from those who push through? It's not superior fitness, it's the mental rehearsal of knowing this pain is temporary and the finish line worth reaching. The Stoics applied this same principle to life's hardships. Epictetus, born into slavery, didn't waste energy raging against his chains. He focused on what no captor could take: his thoughts, his values, his ability to endure. That long-game perspective didn't just help him survive, it allowed him to flourish as a philosopher whose teachings would outlive his oppressors. This mindset transforms how we experience pressure. Right now, you're likely carrying some burden, a financial worry, a strained relationship, a professional hurdle. Now fast forward 5 years, will this still matter? Not as the raw wound it feels like today, but as a chapter in your growth. The Stoics called this Premeditatio Temporis, the premeditation of time. It's the practice of zooming out until present troubles shrink to their true proportion. When Seneca lost his vast wealth and was exiled to Corsica, he didn't lament the comforts he'd lost. He wrote, "No one suffers long except by their own fault." Not because suffering isn't real, but because we choose whether to let it define us beyond its natural lifespan. Here's the challenge. Pick one current stressor and imagine explaining it to your future self a decade from now. Not dismissively, but with the gentle clarity of hindsight. That argument with your partner, it taught you both how to communicate better. That career setback. It redirected you toward work that truly mattered. The Stoic twist: you don't have to wait for time to provide that perspective, you can borrow it now. When Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal, he reminded himself, what stands in the way becomes the way, not as a platitude but as a practical lens. Every obstacle is raw material for the person you're becoming. This isn't about passive waiting, it's about active trust in the compounding effect of small, steady efforts. A farmer doesn't dig up seeds to check their progress, they tend the soil and let seasons work. Similarly, your ability to handle pressure isn't built in dramatic transformations, but in daily choices to respond with patience rather than panic. Think of the oak tree that withstands storms not because it's rigid, but because it grew strong slowly, ring by ring. Your resilience works the same way. Every time you pause before reacting, every moment you choose principle over impulse, you're not just solving a problem, you're building the unshakable foundation for a life where pressure loses its power to derail you. So ask yourself, what's one challenge you're facing that feels overwhelming today, but might with time and perspective reveal itself as a necessary step? Hold that thought lightly, not as a way to minimize your struggle, but to widen the frame around it. The marathon runner knows the pain of mile 20 isn't the whole story. It's the price of the finish line's triumph. Your current pressure isn't the end of your story either. It's the making of it. Epictetus offered a radical idea that still stops us in our tracks today. What's up to us are our actions, not the results of those actions. Think about the weight that lifts the moment you realize you can pour yourself into something completely, yet remain untouched by whether it succeeds or fails. This isn't indifference, it's the ultimate form of focus. Picture a sculptor chiseling marble. If their attention fixates on whether the finished piece will sell or be praised, each strike of the hammer carries anxiety. But if they're absorbed in the rhythm of their craft, the grain of the stone, the angle of the tool, the work itself becomes the reward. That shift from outcome dependence to process immersion is where pressure dissolves. History's most resilient figures understood this deeply. Take Thomas Edison's famous response to failure. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. Most quote it as optimism, but it's pure Stoicism, a refusal to let external validation dictate his self-worth. Modern psychology confirms this approach. Studies of Olympic athletes reveal that those who focus on personal benchmarks rather than medals actually perform better under pressure. Their secret. They've detached their identity from the scoreboard. The basketball player sinking free throws in an empty gym with the same focus as during championship finals isn't just practicing shots, they're training their mind to value the act itself. Here's where we stumble in daily life. We attach our effort to invisible scorecards, likes on a post, praise from a boss, numbers on a scale, the Stoic alternative. Treat results like weather patterns. You wouldn't blame yourself for rain, so why stake your peace on a promotion or someone else's opinion? Consider the writer who journals daily without readers, or the gardener planting trees they'll never sit under. There's freedom in doing things for their own sake. Marcus Aurelius modeled this as emperor, noting in his private writings, the reward for your actions lies in having done them. Not in trophies, but in the integrity of the effort itself. Try this reframe today. Pick one task where you've been craving a specific outcome, maybe a project at work, a fitness goal, or even a difficult conversation. Now approach it with a single question. How would this change if I cared deeply about doing it well, but not at all about how it's received? You might notice your shoulders relax, your breath deepen. That's not apathy, it's the quiet confidence of someone playing the long game. The artist doesn't paint masterpieces by obsessing over gallery openings. They create them by falling in love with brushstrokes. Your life works the same way. When you anchor yourself in the quality of your effort rather than the unpredictability of results, pressure loses its grip. After all, no one can take away how you chose to show up, only you get to carry that. Seneca once joked that life's misfortunes are like bad actors, they only have power if we take them seriously. This wasn't flippant humor, it was a calculated strategy. Even while exiled to a barren island, he wrote letters filled with wordplay and irony, turning his suffering into material for wit. The message was clear: laughter doesn't deny hardship, it defangs it. Churchill mastered this same art during Britain's darkest hours. As bombs fell on London, he quipped, "They're going to pay for every window they break," transforming terror into collective resolve with a single punchline. These weren't escapes from reality, but weapons against despair. There's neuroscience behind this ancient wisdom. When we laugh, even forcibly, our brains release endorphins that dampen stress hormones. It's like hitting a pressure valve. Suddenly the looming deadline or awkward confrontation shrinks to human scale. The Stoics understood this instinctively. Epictetus, who endured slavery, advised students to view annoying people as comic relief. When someone splashes you in the bathhouse, don't get angry, pretend you're a statue being washed. That shift from victim to amused observer changes everything. Try this with a current frustration. Stuck in traffic, imagine you're a scientist observing an ant colony's rush hour. Boss micromanaging, picture them as an overzealous stage director in a workplace sitcom. The point isn't to avoid solving problems, but to approach them with creative detachment. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi camps, wrote that humor gave prisoners the aloofness necessary to rise above any situation. He recounted prisoners joking about their starvation rations, not because hunger was funny, but because laughter restored agency. Your challenge: pick one recurring stressor and brainstorm its absurdities. Maybe it's your phone auto-correcting messages into gibberish, or your dog's dramatic sigh when you're late for their walk. The more trivial the irritation, the better. Practice narrating it in your head like a documentary parody. You'll discover what Seneca knew: perspective is the ultimate power move. As he wrote while dying, forced to open his veins by Nero's order, "What, won't you even let me edit my final draft?" Even then, he wielded wit as his last act of defiance. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz, captured a truth the Stoics would recognize instantly. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. That pause, sometimes just a heartbeat long, is where resilience is born. Picture yourself stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, late for an important meeting. Your chest tightens, your grip on the steering wheel turns white-knuckled, and the urge to honk or curse rises like a wave. This is the critical moment Frankl described. The traffic jam isn't the problem, it's your mind's instant interpretation of it as a disaster. The Stoics would argue that within that split second before reaction, you hold all the freedom you'll ever need. Epictetus trained his students to widen that space deliberately. He'd say the interrupting colleague, the spilled coffee, the delayed flight, they're all just invitations to practice what he called proherses, the ability to select your response rather than be hijacked by impulse. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient wisdom. Brain scans show that when we insert even a 2-second pause between trigger and reaction, activity shifts from the amygdala, the panic button, to the prefrontal cortex, the wise advisor. That tiny gap is where you go from being a passenger of your emotions to the pilot. Here's how this works in practice. Next time your Wi-Fi cuts out during a video call, notice the flash of frustration, then stretch that moment. Breathe in while counting to 3 and ask, is my anger fixing the connection? The answer will likely drain the tension right out of your shoulders. This isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about choosing which emotions deserve your energy. Marcus Aurelius journaled about this nightly, reviewing moments when he'd reacted poorly and mentally rehearsing better responses for next time. He wasn't perfecting himself for perfection's sake, he was building reflexes for when real crises hit. Consider the traffic jam again, but this time with Stoic tools. Instead of fuming, you might use the delay to listen to an audiobook you've been meaning to finish, or observe how sunlight filters through the windshield, creating patterns you'd normally miss. The situation hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. Naval Admiral James Stockdale, shot down over Vietnam and held as a POW for 7 years, credited this principle with his survival. Tortured and isolated, he'd whisper to himself, "I'm not in charge of what they do to me, only of what I do with it." That mental space, however small, became his fortress. So where can you insert a deliberate pause today? Maybe it's when your child interrupts your work for the 5th time, or when a stranger's careless comment stings. Test Frankl's theory. Inhale deeply before speaking, step outside for 30 seconds of cold air, or even hum a silly tune to break the spiral. The goal isn't to eliminate reactions, it's to upgrade them. Like a judo master using an opponent's momentum, you'll discover that pressure loses its force when met with purposeful pause. As Seneca wrote, "No wind is favorable if you don't know your port." That space between stimulus and response, that's your port, and it's always within reach. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who trained Epictetus, made a radical claim for his time. It is impossible for a person who lives luxuriously to train themselves for hardship, just as it's impossible for someone who avoids exercise to become physically strong. This wasn't just ancient fitness advice, it was a blueprint for building unshakable resilience. He saw what modern science now confirms. Your body isn't separate from your ability to handle pressure, it's the foundation. Think of those moments when stress hits, your heart races, your breath shortens, your muscles tense. Now imagine facing that same stressor after a night of deep sleep, with nourishing food in your system and endorphins flowing from movement. The challenge hasn't changed, but your capacity to meet it has transformed completely. Consider the Roman legionnaires who marched 30 miles a day in full armor. Their commanders knew something we often forget: physical endurance shapes mental endurance. When your body is accustomed to discomfort, your mind stops interpreting every inconvenience as a crisis. This isn't about becoming an athlete. It's about recognizing that how you treat your body directly impacts your emotional resilience. Research from Stanford University found that just 22 minutes of walking boosts problem-solving creativity by 60%. That morning stroll isn't just exercise, it's stealth training for life's pressure points. Here's where modern life sabotages us. We sip caffeine to override exhaustion, scroll screens to numb stress, and wonder why small setbacks feel overwhelming. The Stoic alternative: treat your body like the instrument of resilience it is. Marcus Aurelius woke before dawn to wrestle and train, not because he enjoyed it, but because he knew a sluggish body breeds a sluggish mind. One actionable practice: try this for a week before checking your phone in the morning. Step outside for a 5-minute walk. No agenda, no podcasts, just movement and fresh air. Notice how differently you approach the day's first challenge when your body has had this small victory. Sleep is perhaps the most underrated Stoic tool. Seneca wrote letters late into the night, but always prioritized rest, calling it nature's gentle reinforcer. When researchers at UC Berkeley studied sleep deprivation, they found tired brains amplify negative emotions by 60% while shrinking problem-solving capacity. That critical email you rage drafted at 2 a.m., the Stoics would nod knowingly. Your exhausted brain turned a molehill into a mountain. Nutrition plays its part too. Ancient Stoics favored simple, hearty meals not just for discipline, but for clarity. A gut bloated with processed food sends stress signals to the brain via the vagus nerve, while balanced meals stabilize mood. One Roman military tactic involved feeding troops olives and almonds before battle, early recognition that steady energy prevents panic. So ask yourself, how does skipping meals or skimping on sleep show up in your stress responses? That colleague who irritates you, do they truly worsen, or does your blood sugar? The looming deadline, is it genuinely catastrophic, or is your exhausted mind filling gaps with dread? Physical resilience creates mental margin, the space between stimulus and response where wisdom lives. As Musonius Rufus insisted, how can someone master their emotions if they've never mastered their appetite? Start small, hydrate well, take the stairs, sleep 30 minutes earlier. Your future self under pressure will thank you. Marcus Aurelius began each day with a ritual few world leaders would consider, listing in his journal the traits he admired in mentors, from his adoptive father's calm demeanor to his philosophy teacher's sharp intellect. When you arise in the morning, he wrote, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. That wasn't just morning gratitude, it was strategic resilience building. The emperor who carried Rome's burdens knew something we often forget. No one becomes unshakable alone. Stoicism wasn't meant to be practiced in isolation. It thrives in community, where wisdom is shared like armor passed between soldiers before battle. This contrasts starkly with modern life's paradox. We're more connected than ever, yet loneliness has become a silent epidemic. Scrolling through curated highlight reels leaves us feeling inadequate, while real conversations about struggle remain rare. The Stoics would find this baffling. When Seneca faced exile, he didn't suffer in silence. He wrote letters to Lucilius that became masterpieces of shared resilience. Epictetus, teaching in a cramped Athenian classroom, built his philosophy on dialogue, not monologue. Their strength came not from solitary toughness, but from what psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi calls the social flow of meaning, the alchemy that happens when people gather to sharpen each other's thinking. Consider the Japanese concept of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold lacquer, making fractures part of the art. A Stoic community works similarly. It doesn't hide cracks, it transforms them into strength through collective wisdom. When a member stumbles, others don't offer empty reassurance. They ask Stoic questions. What part of this can you influence? How might this challenge serve you? Modern research validates this approach. Harvard's 85-year happiness study found that people with strong social connections not only handle stress better but physically heal faster. Your brain literally processes pain differently when you feel supported. So where do you find such a community today? Philosophy cafes are re-emerging in cities worldwide, from Paris to Tokyo, where strangers discuss timeless questions over coffee. Online forums like the Stoic Fellowship host virtual gatherings where a software engineer in Mumbai might trade insights with a nurse in Toronto. Even book clubs can become resilience incubators when discussions move beyond plot summaries to personal applications. The key is seeking spaces where vulnerability meets growth, where you can admit struggles without being drowned in pity or drowned out by toxic positivity. Who reinforces your resilience? Maybe it's a friend who asks probing questions instead of offering quick fixes. A colleague who shares their own failures along with successes. Even historical figures can become mentors across time. Marcus Aurelius' journal entries feel startlingly personal when read not as abstract philosophy, but as letters to your future self. The point isn't finding perfect people, but fellow travelers committed to the same rugged path. As Seneca reminded Lucilius, A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a person perfected without trials. Together, those trials become less about enduring and more about evolving. Start small. Identify one person who energizes your growth, not someone who simply agrees with you, but who challenges you to articulate your thinking. Then go deeper, share a current challenge and ask, how might a Stoic approach this? You'll discover what the ancients knew. Pressure shared is pressure halved, while wisdom shared becomes wisdom squared. The emperor who shouldered an empire's weight never pretended he carried it alone. Neither should you. There's a peculiar freedom that comes from staring directly at what most of us spend our lives avoiding, the simple, unchangeable fact that our time here is limited. The Stoics called this memento mori, a Latin phrase meaning remember you must die. But this wasn't some morbid fixation. It was a wake-up call to live with urgency and purpose. Picture a near-miss car accident where everything slows down, and in that split second you realize what truly matters. The argument you were replaying in your head suddenly feels trivial. The work email that seemed so urgent loses its grip. That's the power of memento mori, not to scare us, but to sharpen our focus on what deserves our energy and what doesn't. Think of Steve Jobs' famous Stanford commencement speech, delivered after his cancer diagnosis. He didn't dwell on fear. He spoke of death as life's change agent, the force that strips away the unimportant. Remembering that you are going to die, he said, is the best way to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. That's the Stoic twist. When you stop pretending you have unlimited time, you start spending your days like currency, investing in what truly enriches you. The deadlines, the petty conflicts, the need for external validation, they all shrink when held against the backdrop of life's brevity. History offers a striking example. Admiral Horatio Nelson, one of Britain's greatest naval heroes, carried a coffin on his ship as a constant reminder of mortality. Morbid, perhaps, but it also fueled his legendary focus in battle. He didn't waste energy on trivial concerns. Every decision carried weight because he knew his time was finite. The Stoics practiced this same mental exercise. Seneca would end his day by asking, have I lived enough, not in years but in depth of experience? Marcus Aurelius wrote, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Here's the challenge. Imagine today held extra weight not as a threat but as a gift. What pressures would you shrug off like a coat you no longer need? The co-worker's snide remark, the obsession with a flawless presentation, the endless chase for more, would any of it still demand your attention? This practice isn't about dismissing life's challenges. It's about discerning which ones are worthy of your limited heartbeats. A musician doesn't fret over off-key notes when composing their magnum opus. A parent doesn't rage over spilled milk during their child's fleeting childhood. So try this tonight. As you lie in bed, ask yourself Seneca's question, if this were my last day, would I be proud of how I spent it? Not to guilt yourself, but to clarify. You might notice something surprising. The things that truly matter rarely come with the loudest alarms. They're quiet, persistent whispers, the conversation you've been avoiding, the creative project you've postponed, the forgiveness you've withheld. Memento mori doesn't darken life, it illuminates what's been there all along, waiting for you to stop mistaking busyness for meaning. The pressure to impress fades. The call to live grows clearer, and in that space you find not fear but focus. Seneca saw right through our modern obsession with busyness 2,000 years ago. In his piercing essay on the shortness of life, he called out the paradox of our existence. People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy. Today, we've taken this wastefulness to new heights, wrapping ourselves in the false badge of honor that is hustle culture. The late-night emails, the back-to-back meetings, the performative exhaustion, they're not markers of productivity, but of a fundamental misunderstanding of what truly makes life meaningful. Consider the modern workplace myth of artificial urgency, that project deadline that can't possibly wait until Monday, the frantic Slack messages marked ASAP. More often than not, these are self-inflicted wounds, not genuine emergencies. A tech CEO recently made headlines by implementing what he called urgent-free Fridays, no internal meetings, no non-critical emails, just uninterrupted deep work or strategic thinking. At first, his team panicked. How would anything get done? But within weeks, they discovered something astonishing. 70% of what they'd considered urgent wasn't urgent at all. Problems solved themselves, clients adapted to reasonable response times, and the quality of work improved dramatically. This isn't laziness, it's the Stoic discipline of distinguishing between real priorities and manufactured crises. The psychological toll of false urgency is staggering. Researchers at Columbia University found that employees who believe they're constantly putting out fires show cortisol levels similar to soldiers in combat zones, except without the recovery periods that even war provides. Our bodies aren't designed for perpetual emergency mode, yet we've normalized living with our sympathetic nervous systems permanently activated. Seneca would recognize this immediately as what he called the disease of those who are always busy yet never truly living. The Roman philosopher observed wealthy elites rushing between social obligations, complaining they had no time for philosophy or family, while enslaved laborers found moments of reflection in their few hours of rest. The difference wasn't schedules, it was priorities. Here's the uncomfortable question. What if much of the pressure you feel isn't imposed by others, but by your own unwillingness to say, "This can wait"? The entrepreneur who checks emails during their child's recital, the student who pulls all-nighters for assignments they had weeks to complete, the manager who schedules a 7 a.m. call that could have been an email. They're not victims of circumstance, but volunteers in a race no one asked them to run. Ancient Stoics practiced something called the view from above, imagining their lives from a cosmic perspective. Try applying that to your to-do list. Will this matter in a month? A year on your deathbed, the answer cuts through noise like sunlight through fog. Practical resistance starts small. Audit your commitments for 1 week, marking each as either 1 truly urgent health, safety, legal obligations, 2 important but not urgent relationships, skill building, long-term goals, or 3 artificial urgency, most emails, last-minute requests, self-imposed deadlines. The third category is your pressure release valve. A financial analyst client of mine discovered 30% of her crises disappeared simply by responding, "I'll have this to you by realistic date." No apologies, no drama, just sane boundaries. The sky didn't fall. In fact, her colleagues began respecting her time more. This isn't about shirking responsibility, it's about reclaiming sovereignty over your attention. When Seneca advised Lucilius to set aside certain hours for the mind's improvement, he wasn't suggesting laziness, but the opposite, focused effort on what enriches life rather than depletes it. The modern equivalent might be turning off notifications for 2-hour blocks to engage in actual work, or scheduling blank space between meetings to process and reflect. These aren't luxuries, they're the conditions under which quality thinking emerges. As one reformed workaholic put it, "I used to pride myself on answering emails within minutes. Now I pride myself on having thoughts worth writing about." So here's your challenge. Identify one area where you've been confusing motion with progress. Maybe it's the compulsion to immediately respond to every message, or the habit of over-preparing for low-stakes meetings. For 1 week, experiment with Seneca's question: is this activity moving me toward wisdom or just keeping me busy? You might discover, as many do, that much of what feels like productive pressure is just the sound of your own wheels spinning. True urgency isn't about speed, it's about significance. And that's something no deadline can dictate. Epictetus, the philosopher born into slavery, had a radical way of viewing life's hardships. He saw them as gifts. Not in a sentimental way, but with the clarity of a blacksmith appreciating the forge that tempers steel. Difficulty shows what men are, he wrote. Therefore, when difficulty befalls you, remember that God is training you. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm, and instead of cursing the wind, you straighten your posture and let it teach you balance. That's Stoic gratitude in action, not denying the storm's fury, but recognizing its hidden curriculum. Now contrast this with how most of us react to stress. A delayed flight sparks outrage. A critical email ruins our morning. We act as though comfort is our birthright and inconvenience a personal affront. But here's the irony: the very things we complain about are often the ones building resilience we'll need later. A young doctor's brutal residency shifts don't just teach medicine, they forge the stamina to handle midnight emergencies years later. A writer's rejected manuscripts don't just disappoint, they thicken the skin needed for public criticism. The Stoics called this antifragility long before the term existed. The idea that some things don't just endure stress but grow stronger because of it. Consider the wartime diary of a London secretary during the Blitz. Between descriptions of air raids and rationing, she wrote, "Oddly, I've never felt more alive." We share our last tea bags, sing in bomb shelters, and discover how little we truly need. What she initially feared as unbearable became a masterclass in resourcefulness and camaraderie. The bombs didn't change, her perception of them did. This is the alchemy of Stoic gratitude, not pretending suffering doesn't hurt, but refusing to let pain blind you to the strength it's cultivating. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, jotting down thanks for even his difficult relatives. They show me what I never want to become. So here's a question to sit with. What's one pressure point in your life that's secretly strengthening you? Maybe it's the micromanaging boss who's teaching you patience, or the financial constraint sparking creativity. The sleepless nights with a newborn aren't just exhaustion, they're boot camp for a deeper kind of love. Even frustration in traffic can be a drill for keeping calm when real crises hit. The key isn't to romanticize hardship, but to interrogate it. What muscle is this struggle developing? History offers a striking example in Thomas Edison's laboratory. After years of work, a fire destroyed his entire invention archive. Watching the flames, he told his son, "Go get your mother. She'll never see a fire like this again." Then he rebuilt from scratch, later reflecting that the disaster cleared outdated approaches. That's Stoic gratitude at its finest, not a passive "thank you," but an active search for the advantage hidden within the obstacle. The fire didn't change, Edison's relationship to it did. Try this reframe today. Pick one recurring annoyance: a long commute, a tedious chore, a difficult person, and ask, what invisible training is this providing? The commute might be cultivating patience. The chore could be grounding you in the present. The difficult person may be revealing your own triggers. As Epictetus observed, the world is a gymnasium where we come to exercise our souls. Every weight you lift, even unwillingly, is sculpting a stronger version of yourself. The pressure doesn't disappear, but its meaning transforms when you realize it's not breaking you, it's building you. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That simple statement holds the key to one of Stoicism's most powerful concepts, the inner citadel. Picture a fortress within you, unshakable no matter what storms rage outside its walls. The Stoics believed that while we can't always control what happens to us, we can always control how we interpret and respond to it. This mental stronghold isn't built of stone or steel, but of disciplined thought and conscious choice. It's the space where external chaos meets internal calm, where pressure transforms from a threat into a teacher. History offers a profound example in Admiral James Stockdale, shot down over Vietnam and held as a prisoner of war for 7 years. Tortured, isolated, and deprived of basic comforts, Stockdale later credited his survival to Epictetus' teachings. In his memoir, he described how he cultivated an inner world his captors couldn't touch, a mental sanctuary where he could analyze his suffering objectively, rehearse philosophical principles, even find humor in absurdity. While his body endured unimaginable pain, his mind remained sovereign. "They can put you in leg irons," Stockdale wrote, "but no one can chain your thoughts." That's the essence of the inner citadel, the unassailable freedom to choose your perspective, even when every other freedom is stripped away. This principle isn't just for extreme circumstances. Think about the last time you felt trapped, maybe in a tedious meeting, a frustrating commute, or an unavoidable conflict. The physical situation might have been unavoidable, but your inner experience wasn't predetermined. The colleague droning on about irrelevant details, you could mentally reframe it as patience training. The traffic jam, an opportunity to listen to an inspiring podcast. The argument, a chance to practice emotional regulation. The Stoics called this the discipline of assent, the practice of consciously granting or withholding agreement from your initial impressions. It's not about denying reality, but about interrogating it. Is this truly as bad as my first reaction suggests? Building this mental fortress starts with small, daily exercises. Like a medieval mason laying bricks, you strengthen your inner citadel one thought at a time. When criticism stings, pause and ask, does this reflect truth or merely someone's opinion? When plans crumble, consider, what unexpected opportunities might this open? Even mundane irritations become training grounds. The slow barrister isn't ruining your morning. They're giving you a chance to practice grace under minor pressure. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, later wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies all our power. So here's your challenge. Identify one area of life where external circumstances frequently dictate your mood. Maybe it's social media comparisons, workplace politics, or family tensions. Now design one small ritual to reclaim mental sovereignty. It could be as simple as a 3-breath pause before responding to provocation, or jotting down 3 objective facts about a stressful situation before reacting emotionally. These aren't escapes from reality. They're the tools that let you engage with reality on your terms. The storm outside might not change, but your ability to stand steady within it will grow stronger with each intentional choice. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the mind adapts and converts to its own purposes. The obstacle to our acting, the impediment to action, advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Your inner citadel isn't just a refuge, it's the control room where you decide what meaning to assign to every event, and in that decision lies your ultimate freedom. There's a Zen parable about 2 trees in a storm, a mighty oak and a humble willow. The oak stands rigid, trusting its strength, only to be uprooted by the wind. The willow bends, its flexible branches yielding to the gale, and survives unharmed. The Stoics would nod in recognition. This isn't just a lesson about trees, it's a blueprint for human resilience. Marcus Aurelius captured this duality perfectly. The impediment to action advances action, What stands in the way becomes the way. The oak represents our rigid expectations, the belief that life should conform to our plans. The willow embodies Stoic flexibility, the art of adapting without breaking when reality has other ideas. Consider the downfall of Blockbuster in the early 2000s. Here was a company that dominated home entertainment with thousands of stores and a loyal customer base. When Netflix offered to sell itself to Blockbuster for $50 million, executives laughed at the idea of mailing DVDs directly to homes. Their vision of the future was rigid: physical stores, late fees, the status quo. Meanwhile, Netflix, like the willow, kept bending. When streaming technology emerged, they pivoted again, while Blockbuster, rooted in old models, collapsed under the weight of its own inflexibility. The pressure wasn't the market shift itself, it was Blockbuster's refusal to adapt to it. This same principle applies to our personal lives. How often do we suffer not because of circumstances, but because we've tied our happiness to specific outcomes? The promotion that must come through, the relationship that has to work out, the plan that shouldn't change. Stoicism calls this the should trap, the belief that reality owes us conformity to our expectations. Epictetus, who endured slavery, understood this deeply. Don't demand that events happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do, and you will go on well. Notice the subtle power in that shift. It's not passive resignation, it's strategic agility. A modern case study in Stoic flexibility comes from Adobe. In 2012, the software giant faced a crisis. Their flagship products were being pirated globally, and competitors offered cheaper alternatives. Instead of doubling down on anti-piracy measures or clinging to their old sales model, they made a radical pivot, switching from selling software outright to a subscription-based cloud service. Critics called it suicide, but Adobe's leadership, much like the willow in the storm, recognized that resistance to change was the real risk. Within 5 years, their market capitalization tripled. The pressure of piracy became the catalyst for innovation. So where in your life are you playing the oak when you need to be the willow? Maybe it's a career path you're clinging to despite dwindling passion, or a relationship where you keep hoping the other person will change. Perhaps it's the frustration of plans derailed by traffic, weather, or someone else's actions. The Stoic practice here is simple but profound. Regularly ask yourself, what part of this resistance is necessary, and what part is just my rigidity? Musonius Rufus taught that we train for physical flexibility, not just to touch our toes, but to prepare for life's unexpected twists. Mental flexibility works the same way. When a musician jams with others, they don't insist the song go exactly as rehearsed. They listen, adapt, and sometimes create magic in the detours. The same applies to parenting, where rigid expectations lead to daily frustration, while adaptability turns chaos into connection. Even in grief, flexibility isn't about moving on. It's about learning how to carry loss without being crushed by it. Try this exercise. Identify one area where you've been stubbornly resisting change. Now imagine 3 alternate paths forward, not better or worse, just different. The goal isn't to abandon your goals, but to loosen your grip on how they must be achieved. Like a sailor adjusting sails to shifting winds, you'll find that pressure eases when you stop fighting currents and start using them. The willow doesn't win by being strong, it wins by being supple. And in that flexibility lies an unexpected strength, the ability to endure what breaks others. Seneca ended each day with a practice more valuable than any financial audit, a quiet review of his own mind. As candles flickered in his study, he'd retrace his steps like a philosopher detective, examining not what happened to him, but how he'd responded. The soul should know its own movements, he wrote. This nightly ritual wasn't about self-judgment, it was about calibration. Think of a pilot reviewing flight data after landing, not to criticize turbulence, but to understand how the aircraft handled it. That's the power of the Stoic daily review, transforming ordinary pressures into personalized wisdom. Consider how most of us process stressful days. We replay events like highlight reels, what they said, what went wrong, rarely pausing to ask the transformative question, how did I show up in that moment? A project manager might obsess over a missed deadline, but the Stoic inquiry goes deeper. Did I communicate clearly when tensions rose? Did I escalate panic or model focus? These aren't abstract musings, they're mental strength training. Modern psychology confirms this. Harvard researchers found that people who spent just 15 minutes journaling about daily challenges with a focus on their responses, not the events themselves, developed sharper emotional regulation within weeks. Here's how to adapt Seneca's practice today with 3 targeted questions. First, where did I meet pressure with presence today? Maybe it was staying patient during your child's tantrum, or resisting the urge to fire off a snippy email. These small victories matter. They're proof your resilience muscles are growing. Second, where did my reaction amplify the pressure unnecessarily? No shame here, just observation. Perhaps you catastrophized a minor critique or rushed a decision to avoid discomfort. The goal isn't regret, it's pattern recognition. Third, and this is Seneca's twist, what did this teach me about where true control lies? That argument with your partner might reveal how quickly you equate being heard with being loved. The work deadline frenzy could expose an over-identification with productivity. Let's make this concrete. Imagine a nurse named Elena reviewing her shift. She notes with pride how she steadied her voice during a code blue, channeling fear into precise action. She also acknowledges snapping at an intern, not because the intern was incompetent, but because hunger and fatigue shortened her fuse. The lesson, preparation matters. Keeping snacks in her locker isn't self-indulgence, it's crisis prevention. That's the daily review's magic. It turns reflection into strategy. Now consider your own week. What pressure response deserves a quiet moment of acknowledgement? Maybe it was choosing curiosity over defensiveness when receiving feedback, or finally setting that boundary you've avoided. These aren't just wins, they're evidence of your evolving Stoic toolkit. As Seneca reminded Lucilius, every day, every hour, see that you do not betray your own self. The evening review is how you keep that promise, not with grand resolutions, but with honest accounting of where you stood firm and where you'll stand firmer tomorrow. This practice works because it leverages what neuroscientists call targeted memory consolidation. By intentionally revisiting key moments before sleep, you signal to your brain which neural pathways to reinforce. It's why athletes visualize perfect performances at night. The mind doesn't distinguish between vivid recollection and actual experience. Your nightly review does the same for character. Those 10 minutes with your journal aren't just documenting the day, they're architecting the person you're becoming under pressure. So tonight, before screens dim and lights fade, try this. Set aside the mental highlight reel of external events. Instead, ask Seneca's questions like you're interviewing your wisest self. No grades, no guilt, just the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman inspecting their tools after honest work. The storm will come again tomorrow, but each evening's reflection is another brick in your inner citadel. What we've explored together isn't just philosophy, it's a living toolkit for navigating life's storms with steadier hands and a calmer mind. At its core, Stoicism teaches us 3 anchors: control, that radical focus on where our true power lies; perception, the ability to reframe obstacles as opportunities; and resilience, the muscle built through deliberate practice, not chance. These aren't abstract ideas, they're choices available to you the moment pressure arrives, whether you're facing a high-stakes meeting, a personal setback, or the quiet overwhelm of daily life. But here's the liberating truth Epictetus captured so perfectly. No man is free who is not master of himself. This isn't about achieving some unshakable ideal. It's about progress, not perfection. The Stoics weren't marble statues of composure. They were flesh and blood humans who woke up some days feeling just as rattled as we do. What set them apart was their commitment to the practice itself, showing up again and again to separate what's theirs to influence from what isn't, to question their knee-jerk interpretations, and to embrace discomfort as the price of growth. Think of it like learning a language. No one expects fluency after the first lesson. There are days you'll conjugate verbs effortlessly and others where you'll fumble for basic words. Stoicism works the same way. Some days you'll face chaos with surprising calm. Others, you'll catch yourself an hour into needless worry before remembering, oh right, I don't have to entertain this thought. Both scenarios are part of the journey, so here's your invitation, not to overhaul your life overnight, but to experiment with one principle this week. Maybe it's pausing to ask, is this mine to control, before reacting to frustration? Or perhaps it's jotting down 3 objective facts about a stressful situation to strip away exaggerated narratives. Even something as simple as taking 5 deep breaths when your phone pings with bad news, that tiny space between stimulus and response, is where your inner citadel grows stronger. I'd love to hear how it goes. Drop a comment sharing which tool you tried and what you noticed, the breakthroughs, the struggles, the unexpected moments of clarity. Because here's the secret the Stoics knew. Wisdom isn't kept in books. It's forged in the messy, beautiful practice of being human together. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself each dawn, the art of living is more like wrestling than dancing. You don't need perfect form, just the willingness to stay in the ring. Now, go find your